are also proud to once again, alongside our headline partner, AFC, be here today, the defining force in the effort to convert Africa's potential into productive investment. From energy infrastructure and transport corridors to critical minerals and industrial development. Its role in mobilizing long-term patient capital for projects that matter is a model for what African-led development finance can achieve. We are grateful to AFC's continued commitment to this platform and to the broader mission it represents. We are also delighted to welcome Baroness Chapman of Darlington, Minister of State for International Development and Africa at the UK FCDO, representing His Majesty's government. Her presence underscores the UK's commitment to renewed and substantive partnership with African economies, one that aligns trade, investment and development in support of African-led growth. Invest Africa has championed relationships for nearly 70 years since our founding in 1956, and we remain as committed as ever to build on these connections to make and keep it real. So, thank you for joining us. The world is in transition. Africa is ready to shape what comes next. So let's use this today to define partnership on Africa's terms, to make sure what it truly should look like. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal. Indeed, the question of where Africa fits into the world is one that has become more pertinent than ever and is front of mind for many of us. We're now going to move into the keynote addresses for this morning, and it is my honor and pleasure to invite up onto the stage to deliver the first keynote of the day to Baroness Chapman, the UK's Secretary of State for International Development. Baroness Chapman, please.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here and to share the stage with His Excellency President Mahama. Very, very warm welcome to you. Last year, though, the former Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, used this platform to launch a reset of UK policy on Africa. We've had a period of listening and a challenge to think differently about what partnership between the UK and African countries really needs to look like. Since then, we've listened to governments, to businesses, civil society and diaspora voices. In December, and many of you were here for this, that we set out a new approach to Africa. We built on this just a couple of weeks ago at the Global Partnerships Conference, which we co-chaired with South Africa, and we brought together governments, civil society, philanthropy, and the private sector to rethink how we work together to tackle global challenges. And the question now, I think, has become quite simple, and it's that in a tighter, more contested world, what does true partnership look like, and how do we know if we're getting it right? It's a really simple thing to stand here and say, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to do well. It is not about how much we announce that we're going to spend. It is about the difference that we make together. And that means using all of the tools that we have in a much, much more joined up way and being honest about the scale of the challenge. That's important because, of course, aid still matters. It really does, and I think it always will. But it's not the dominant financial flow into Africa, and it will never, ever be the only tool or the only answer that we have. So the UK's new approach is not about doing more of the same. It's about working differently, where 3 themes define what is going to come next, and that is results, reach, and respect. These are 3 tests of our partnership that we will be using. So the first test is results. Our partnerships ought to be judged by the difference that they make, the jobs created, the investment unlocked, the opportunities that are delivered. And those results are needed now more than ever. Last week, I was at the African Development Bank's annual meetings in Brazzaville, where we discussed many things, but 2 of the things that we discussed were these dual crises of Ebola and the Middle East that's impacting the region, and the need to respond quickly in a coordinated way while building resilience at the same time, which is why we focus on outcomes and not just inputs. Because ODA, as we all know, it's a tool, it is not an end in itself, but neither is offering ready-made solutions, but we should be supporting solutions that are built locally and bringing the whole of Team UK to the table. I've seen how this works in practice, as many of you will have too. In Nigeria, where progress on investment into ports, manufacturing, finance and clean energy is creating many jobs. In Ghana, where I visited a textile factory backed by British international investment, now one of the largest garment factories in West Africa. Work I'm really proud to build on as we signed a mutual growth partnership with Ghana this week. And we see it in trade, which is creating jobs, encourages investment and strengthens our ties. The UK imported £17.7 billion of goods from African partners with UK economic partnership agreements last year, but we can do so much more than that. And that's why with the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, we're introducing much more flexible rules of origin. And it's why we've created a new Africa Regional Accumulation Group, 50 African countries able to forge joint supply chains without losing preferences. We also recognise that trade between African countries can unlock huge gains for Africa. The UK was one of the first countries to sign an MOU to support the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and will commence a new phase of support for that very soon. So this, I think, gives you something of a feel of the direction that we're moving in. But the second test is reach. This is doing lots of small things well, which is good, but it's not good enough. The scale of today's challenges, from climate to fragility to the energy transition, require a completely different approach. And that starts with backing the changes that partner countries are driving themselves, like in Ghana, where the mutual growth partnership we've announced this week builds on Ghana's own reforms domestically, steps to cut public debt, bring down inflation, and restore investor confidence, with growth now rebounding. And internationally, with Ghana shaping the agenda, championing the Accra Reset, co-hosting the African Development Fund replenishment, and committing over $5 million of its own resources to ADF 17. Reach means backing the institutions and the platforms that can truly move the dial. Institutions like the World Bank's IDA and the African Development Bank's ADF. Today, around 2/3 of IDA financing goes to Africa, each pound unlocking several more. I saw the impact platforms like this have in the DRC in March and again last week. I was at a vaccine storage facility where UK funding, working through Gavi, UNICEF and the World Health Organization, is strengthening DRC's national systems, and that will save very many lives, and it's being put to the test as we speak. But this is long-term work, building systems takes time, and it's work that the UK, we have truly committed to supporting, including through the current crisis. Reach also means thinking regionally, and the constraints that African countries face do not stop at borders, so neither can the solutions that we work on together. So I'm pleased to announce our new UK African Union Partnership Programme, which is supporting AU-led action across peace and security, climate, growth and trade, areas where the AU's ability to bring together member states to work politically delivers results that no country could achieve by itself. And that's why we're pairing UK technical expertise with diplomatic engagement. So we're backing the AU to convene, to align, to lead and to act. And reach also means that the public and private sectors need to work together. That's what's behind the Emerging Markets and Developing Economies Investor Task Force, which I co-convene with the Economic Secretary to the Treasury. It brings together government, regulators, leaders in finance to unlock investment. Since it launched last May, the task force has diagnosed the constraints holding investors back. Many of them will be familiar to you. But now it's about getting on with tackling those constraints, from improving access to the data investors need to make decisions, to increasing awareness of opportunities, and helping to develop scalable investment products and working with credit agencies and regulators to reduce frictions so that the capital, what we know is there, that actually flows. At the same time, we're using the government's own tools to crowd in capital through British International Investment's new strategy, with a stronger focus on mobilising additional private capital alongside its own resources, through supporting homegrown initiatives on the continent to attract investment, like the Green Project Preparation Facility in Ghana, announced this week, hosted by FSD Africa, with UK support backing the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund's work to generate more investable opportunities, and through the Private Infrastructure Development Group, which has had great success in Nigeria and East Africa, deploying guarantees to unlock local currency financing for infrastructure projects. And it's laying the groundwork to develop similar facilities across Africa in partnership with the African Development Bank, while also supporting projects like Ghana's Takoradi Floating Dock Project as part of a wider investment consortium. This project is delivered in partnership with the Ghana Ports and Harbours Authority and is set to create up to around 430 direct jobs, while strengthening a regional maritime hub that is key for Ghana and that UK shipping and logistics firms also rely on. And that's what I think scale needs to look like. But the third test, the final test, and possibly the most important, is that of respect. And in many ways, I think this is the test that we've spent most time really thinking hard about. As we developed our New Africa approach, we heard loud and clear the importance of aligning what we do with national priorities, supporting regional leadership and building on African institutions. I heard it put really simply earlier this year from a health minister who said, "We want a universal health service. You can't do that for us. You can't buy it for us. You need to build it. Help us to build it." And I think that has really stuck with me. Respect does mean building systems, not substituting for them. It means backing self-reliance, never creating dependency, recognizing that Africa's own resources, financial, human, institutional, dwarf any ODA flows. They always have, and that we will drive in this way development and prosperity. But respect also means being honest partners. Honesty can be difficult in these situations, working through differences together without walking away, without losing sight of what citizens need. It's stability, opportunity, safety, dignity. And respect means that we show up for the whole relationship, not only for development, not only for trade or investment, but also for security, for culture, for innovation, and the deep ties that there are between our people. And that is partnership that African stakeholders told us that they want and that they expect. So for the UK, last year was about the reset. Now it's about delivery. It's a phase where partnerships are judged not by what is promised, but by what is delivered, not by inputs, but by outcomes. The UK's ambition is very simple. It's to be a long-term, serious partner, working with others as genuine partners, including through the Global Partnerships Compact that we launched last month, measured by results, reach, and respect. Thank you. And it is now my very great pleasure to hand over to our true partner in this journey, His Excellency, President John Mahama. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kindly resume your seats. Let me proceed on the protocol established and just say, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is both an honor and a privilege for me to join you this morning at the historic Guildhall of London for the 12th edition of the Africa Debate 2026. And so permit me at the outset to express my sincere appreciation for this invitation and for the remarkable work the organization continues to do in building bridges between Africa and global capital, between governments and enterprises, and between opportunity and investment. I'm equally pleased that this engagement follows the successful Ghana Investment Forum held yesterday in collaboration with Ghana's High Commission in London. That forum offered an important opportunity to showcase Ghana's transformation agenda and our readiness to deepen strategic partnerships with the United Kingdom and the wider global investment community. Today's gathering could not be more timely. We meet at a moment of profound transition in the global economy. Trade systems are shifting, geopolitical alliances are evolving, supply chains are being reconfigured, development finance is shrinking, and nations are searching for resilience, growth, energy, security, and trusted partners to work with. And in the midst of this transition, Africa is rising not as a passive observer, but as a decisive force in shaping the future global economy. The theme before us today, redefining partnerships, navigating a world in transition, demands more than discussion. It demands a new framework for engagement between Africa and the world. For too long, Africa was viewed primarily through the lens of aid, crisis, and dependency. But that narrative is collapsing under the weight of current reality. The Africa of today is youthful, it is dynamic, it is entrepreneurial, it is digitally connected, it is resource-rich, and increasingly reform-oriented. Africa is home to the world's youngest population, and by 2050, 1 in every 4 people on Earth will be an African. Our continent possesses vast reserves of critical minerals required for the global energy transition, including cobalt, lithium, manganese, copper, bauxite, and rare earth elements. The African Continental Free Trade Area, the largest free trade area in the world by number of participating countries, presents unprecedented opportunities for industrialization, manufacturing, and intra-African trade. This is not merely Africa's future potential. This is Africa's present reality. Even amid global uncertainty, Africa continues to demonstrate resilience and growth. While many advanced economies struggle with stagnation, Africa remains one of the world's fastest growing regions. But let me also state clearly, Africa does not seek sympathy. Africa seeks partnerships, fair partnerships, strategic partnerships, mutually beneficial partnerships. The era in which Africa served merely as a source of raw material for other nations' industrialization must end. The future relationship between Africa and the world must be built on value addition, on industrialization, technology transfer, infrastructure investments, skills development, and a shared prosperity. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present Ghana as evidence that transformation is possible when leadership, reform, and national purpose converge. When I assumed office in January 2025, Ghana was confronting one of the most difficult economic periods in its recent history. Inflation was high, investor confidence had weakened, the national currency had depreciated sharply, public debt had risen significantly, and the country was navigating a painful debt restructuring program. But we refused to accept decline as our destiny. In 18 months, we've implemented disciplined macroeconomic reforms, we've restored fiscal confidence, and we've stabilized the economy. These have revised Ghana's outlook positively, and investor appetite is returning. And let me emphasize that this recovery is not merely statistical, it is structural. We're repositioning Ghana as a productive economy built on industrialization, agro-processing, exports, logistics, digital transformation, and value addition. Through our 24-hour economy initiative and accelerated export development program, we're creating a new growth model designed to expand production, increase exports, create jobs, and improve competitiveness. This initiative is not just about extending working hours. It is about reorganizing the Ghanaian economy to maximize productivity across manufacturing, logistics, transportation, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, digital services, tourism, and the creative economy. Ladies and gentlemen, the message I bring to investors today is simple. Ghana is open for business. But beyond that, Ghana is ready for strategic partnerships that are anchored in long-term value creation. Our government is undertaking major reforms to improve the ease of doing business. We're strengthening transparency, we're modernizing our infrastructure, and we're creating a more predictable investment environment. We're investing aggressively in our transport infrastructure, roads, railways, and ports, energy reliability, agro-industrial parks, logistical corridors, aviation and air cargo systems, digital infrastructure, skills development, and innovation ecosystems. Our flagship Big Push infrastructure program is creating investment opportunities across road, rail, energy, housing, water systems, and logistic infrastructure. We're also prioritizing local participation in investment partnerships because sustainable growth must create domestic capacity and shared prosperity. For investors gathered here today, Ghana offers political stability, democratic continuity, strategic geographical access to the West African sub-region, and a government that is committed to reform and private sector growth. And importantly, Ghana offers clarity of vision. Redefining partnerships requires honesty. The current international financial architecture remains unequal and outdated. African countries continue to face disproportionately high borrowing costs despite carrying some of the world's greatest growth potential. Climate financing commitments made to developing nations have remained largely unmet. Technology and innovative ecosystems remain heavily concentrated in the advanced economies. Trade barriers still disadvantage African producers seeking access to global markets. This must change. True partnership requires trade that rewards value addition. Africa must no longer be seen as an exporter of raw materials only to import finished products at significantly higher cost. Debt reform that supports development is needed. Debt restructuring mechanisms must become faster, fairer, and more inclusive. Climate finance must be delivered. Africa contributes the least to global emissions and yet bears a disproportionate burden of the effects of climate change. Africa's digital transformation must be driven not by dependency, but by collaboration and knowledge sharing. Global governance institutions must reflect contemporary realities, including Africa's demographic and economic significance. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Kingdom has a unique opportunity to redefine its relationship with Africa for the 21st century. Beyond our historical ties, there exists today a strategic economic imperative for deeper UK-Africa engagement. Africa represents one of the world's greatest growth frontiers. And for the United Kingdom, partnership with Africa can strengthen trade diversification, investment expansion, energy transition goals, financial services, and innovation collaboration. For Africa, partnership with the United Kingdom can accelerate industrialization, infrastructure development, technology transfer, education partnerships, and access to capital. This relationship must therefore evolve from one that is primarily shaped by aid to one that is anchored in enterprise, innovation, and investment. And I commend organizations such as Invest Africa for facilitating this transition precisely. To the investors gathered here today, Africa is not a risk to be managed. Africa is an opportunity to be seized. The next phase of global growth will not be driven solely by matured economies. Emerging regions will increasingly shape it as population expands, urbanization grows, consumption rises, and untapped productive capacity is realized. And Africa represents that frontier. And Ghana stands ready to serve as one of the continent's most reliable gateways for investment, manufacturing, finance, innovation, and regional trade expansion. The opportunities before us are real, and the time to engage is now. Guildhall has witnessed defining moments in global history, and I hope that this gathering here today will also be remembered as one of those moments. A moment when Africa's voice was heard clearly, a moment when global investors recognized the scale of opportunity emerging across our continent, a moment where partnership was redefined not through dependence but through mutual respect and shared prosperity. Africa is not waiting to be rescued. Africa is building. Africa is innovating and is transforming. And Ghana is proud to be part of that transformation. As our late President Kwame Nkrumah reminded us many years ago, the future belongs to those who prepare for it. Ghana is preparing, Africa is preparing, and together through genuine partnership, we can build a more prosperous and more equitable global future. And so God bless Ghana, God bless Africa, God bless the United Kingdom, and may our partnerships be worthy of this historic moment. And so I thank you for your kind attention.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll allow me to follow on from all protocols observed. It falls to me with great pleasure to thank firstly Baroness Chapman for being here today. Thank you for your excellent remarks. I recall how frenetic the diary of the Minister for Africa is, so we're very grateful that you find time to be with us today. And it is, as you pointed out, it is vital that we engage with international investment community, not just from the UK into Africa, but as you rightly pointed out, to facilitate and enhance intra-African trade and intra-African investment. You are absolutely right to highlight the importance of partnerships. You were correct to emphasise an investment aligned with African priorities, results, reach and respect, outcomes, not inputs, facilitate intra-African trade, coordination with others when it's both in the UK's and Africa's interest to do so, and the importance of private capital in helping enhance and accelerate the velocity of Africa's growth story. Baroness Chapman, thank you for being here this morning. It is the best job in the UK government, so may you hold it for a long time. Thank you. President Mahama, Mr. President, on behalf of all of us in the Guildhall and watching online, thank you for taking your time to speak to us this morning. You were articulate, precise and ambitious in your remarks. You set out very clearly your vision for the long-term investment partnerships, building on the economic progress your government has already made. Declining inflation, strengthening of reserves, interest rates easing, currency stability, fiscal position strengthening, 6% growth in 2025. In the UK, we have much to learn from you. The key themes that you developed in your remarks were absolutely spot on. Added value investment, the industrialisation of agriculture, infrastructure enhancement, both key transport routes, but also the AI strategy and the digital economy, creating opportunity for Ghanaians, particularly with added value industrialisation, and the passion that I know you personally have for the 24-hour economy. And if there's any way that we in the UK and investors can help and facilitate the acceleration of that, we'd be delighted to talk to your team about doing that. The importance of a predictable investment environment, but also the mutually beneficial partnerships. Africa is a decisive force shaping the world, not taking from the outside. The opportunities that exist from the Africa Free Trade Area, enhancing intra-African trade and investment, and the importance of Ghana as an investment destination because of the stability, the political stability that you mentioned, Mr. President. Strategic economic imperatives and the opportunity for UK investors. And importantly, you mentioned Ghanaian innovation. Some of the brightest and best innovators, both in technology and elsewhere on the African continent, are in Ghana. So we need to enhance and facilitate our support for that. Mr. President, the Invest Africa family will work with your government to unlock investment, create jobs, enhance human capital, and drive economic development in Ghana. Mr. President, thank you for being here, and thank you for your excellent speech this morning. If I can now ask Samaila to join me on the stage. Now, as many of you will know, Samaila is the President and CEO of the African Finance Corporation, one of the, I don't think this is flattering you unnecessarily, but one of the most entrepreneurial, fastest growing, impactful DFIs on the African continent. But Samaila, had we described when we sat on this very platform 2 or 3 years ago the place that the world was now in, people I don't think would have taken us seriously. So we have to look, I think, at the move from geopolitics to geoeconomics. The fact that Africa is now in a position where multi-alignment is becoming more important, where investment opportunities are coming from not just traditional investment jurisdictions, China, the UK and the European Union, but also now increasingly from the Gulf, Japan, Latin America, Turkey, and fingers crossed that at last the United States have woken up to the opportunities in Africa. And that's, of course, in addition to the African diaspora and intra-African investment that is accelerating, which is a very positive thing. Now, you've got a very successful model at the AFC that you've developed since 2018. I think it might be helpful just to unpack a little bit what has made that model successful and how, at the AFC, you're going to cope with those changing geo-economic headwinds.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me here today. So, every generation gets a moment. I think Africa is living one of those moments. So for the first time, all the mega trends that are shaping the world, energy transition, digital transition, food security, all of them require Africa. So Africa right now is at the center of what the world needs. Africa is no longer a continent of the future. Africa is a continent of the present. And Africans are building Africa today. Africans are demonstrating that they can seize the opportunity to transform and create value in their economies. Africans are moving from exporting raw materials to transforming and creating jobs on the continent. So in this whole geopolitics, geoeconomic contest, we must be grounded on what are our priorities. Our priorities as Africans are jobs. We have young growing population, we need to create jobs for them. We must seize the opportunity of the demand for our resources, convert those resources in our continent and create jobs for our people. So what we've done at the AFC is to try to reframe how we see development. Development's main challenge is mindset and execution. So we've tried to build a positive mindset with conviction about our future and our present, and we execute on that. And we are looking right now more at the future than what we've done in the past, and we're looking at Africa in 2050. We're asking ourselves, what would Africa look like in 2050? We're going to have 2.5 billion people living on the continent. How will 2.5 billion people be fed? What energy systems will support 2.5 billion people? We're thinking about a quarter of the world's population, a quarter of the world's workforce. What kind of work will they do? How are we training them and preparing them for that future? So the focus for us is how we build Africa. We have to build the Africa we want. We have to focus on the future that our children will inherit, and we must build it. And a good example of that is what is already happening. So as we speak, we all know that the world's largest refinery is being built in Africa. The Dangote refinery is expanding from 650,000 barrels per day to 1.4 million barrels per day. We all know that the largest fertilizer complex is being built in Africa. We have already supported all of these enterprises and will continue to support more. We're supporting the creation of the largest copper smelter in Africa, and we'll support several other such initiatives. So how we have grown our business is to look at the Africa opportunity and scale how we deliver on the Africa opportunity. And I can assure you there are several such opportunities that we work on and we'll continue to work on. So we work with the government of Ghana, we would engage them more deeply on what their future is and how we can support them. We engage several other African countries on how we can work with them to co-create that future and how AFC will support the realization of that future.
So I think that you make a series of very good points, Samaila, if I may say so, but I think also it needs to just be mentioned that, of course, despite that and the progress that's been made, there is still a huge capital deficit, particularly in infrastructure development, whether it be power or roads or the digitalization of African economies. And clearly that capital can no longer be provided just by governments, external governments. It has to come both from within Africa, whether it be pension funds, but also particularly from the private sector. And I wondered what more you thought needed to be done to encourage more private sector funding to come into Africa, not just in infrastructure, but that's one example we could use, and whether the AFC have the institutional resilience and other African institutions have the resilience to be able to cope with that.
Good. So several points there. The first one is we've always believed that African development must be financed by African capital, which is why we are focused on what capital pools exist on the continent. Our research, which we published the first time last year on Africa's domestic capital pools, showed that we had $4 trillion on the continent. This year, when we revised the research, it showed $4.4 trillion. So what that means is that African capital exists and it is growing. The challenge, however, is that most of the capital is invested outside the continent, and when it's invested in the continent, it's invested in short-dated government paper, which doesn't work for any one of us. Why? Because the governments borrow at much higher cost, and the savers don't get returns because inflation wipes out the returns. So we must be asking ourselves, what can we do to change this? The President, in his remarks, mentioned the high cost of capital. In my earlier conversations with Baroness, we talked about the high cost of capital and what we can do to change it. Now, unlocking this cost of capital is fundamental to Africa's growth and development. Why is that the case? So we have all this capital on the continent. It doesn't convert into industry. It doesn't convert into jobs. Most of the capital is invested outside the continent. So the question is, what is the incentive for investing outside the continent versus investing locally on the continent? What change will happen in regulation to reverse that? And I think this is a very important question, because the core of the problem with the cost of capital is that capital is incentivized to go outside the continent, not to work on the continent. If you check the capital charge for investing outside the continent in what we call high-quality liquid assets, it's much lower than for us to invest on the continent. And we cannot change or cost development if we don't address this fundamental flaw in the regulation. Because as an African bank, I make capital charge when I invest in Africa, but when I invest outside the continent, there's no capital charge. And the reality is that Africa is not as risky. The empirical evidence is clear, but the behavior has not changed. So we must address this, and I think for us, African capital working in Africa is more important than foreign capital coming into Africa.
Can I just push you a little bit more on that? Because there are other factors at play here. It's not, whilst regulation is important, institutional resilience is important, so is macroeconomic governance, providing stability, providing an environment which interest rates are lower, so banks are not just buying country T-bills, they're also lending to the SME sector. So, and it was a point that the Nigerian finance minister made yesterday, that the importance of macroeconomic stability, reducing interest rates, providing therefore security for African capital to be comfortable finding a home in Africa, not necessarily in the country from which it emanated, but also minimizing FX risk, management risk, and potentially repatriation of hard currency or local currency to another part of Africa.
So, clearly, macroeconomic stability is a given. It's not one of those things that you can debate, because you can see how they translate into jobs and stability. So that's not the challenge. The challenge is we need to reform our rules. So, for example, we have always ask other African countries to look at what other African countries are doing to ensure that they have mechanisms for savings to go into infrastructure, to go into industry, to go into jobs. So one of the things that we can do is to look at the regulation around asset allocation. We advise that pension managers must be educated, and trustees, that managing savings has to be beyond managing for safety and liquidity. It has to be managing for growth. Why? If you don't create jobs, the people that you're managing their savings for will end up supporting their children. And that is not a fair exchange for anybody. So we must be intentional about asset allocation into infrastructure, asset allocation into private equity venture capital, asset allocation into capital markets in general. And we should be looking at building the financial architecture that first prices African risk correctly and ensures that there is transmission mechanism for the vast African capital pools to flow into productive investments. So it's a combination of macroeconomic stability, yes, but we also need reform. We need change in regulation, particularly around asset allocation, and more importantly, around incentivizing African capital to stay within Africa.
Yeah. We haven't got long, I'm afraid, but I'd love to get your take either now or another time about the importance of creating jobs in Africa, a point that you raised earlier, and how that juxtaposes with the rise of artificial intelligence, the rise of robotics, which is going to come to Africa. I know there are investors looking at opening up robotic plants on the African continent, so how all that fits together. But you may or may not want to pick them up. But the final question, Samaila, I just want to ask you, if there was one structural shift in terms of partnership, what would it be, and what would have the most, which shift would have the most impact for the African economic development and growth story?
So, I mean, there are several things. The first thing for me is that partnerships going forward has to be partnerships around transformation, not extraction. So, all the geoeconomic interests around critical raw materials can't be for us to export more copper or to export more platinum. No, it should be to produce more cathode and more copper wires in Africa. It can't be that we want to export more bauxite. It is to build aluminum refineries and aluminum smelters in Africa. That for me is the first change about how we define partnership. The second change for me is we must understand the root of the cost of capital challenge that we have on the continent and address it. And to my mind, what we need to do is to change regulation that incentivizes capital to flow out of Africa and ensure that African capital can reside within Africa. The third thing for me that is important is for us as Africans to take more ownership of our development, to have more conviction that we can deliver, to look at the examples of how we are executing and to seek to replicate that at scale.
And I also think it's worth just pointing out to everybody, if you didn't know, that Samaila chaired the Johannesburg effort in the fringes or under the umbrella of the G20 meeting in South Africa, and managed to insert in the IMF structure a sub-Saharan Africa chairman of the relevant part of the International Monetary Fund. So Samaila, thank you very much indeed for that huge progress.
And then finally, before we leave, we talked about AI and technology. So that's the future, and Africa is right at the center of that. Africans are very tech savvy. If you recall, mobile banking came from Africa. It was Africans recognizing the challenge of several branches and coming up with a technology that allowed for mobile banking to happen. So the same wave of innovation is happening across several areas. And at the Africa Finance Corporation, we have created a dedicated technology fund to fund innovation in Africa. And we're hoping that we can partner with several other people to scale that technology fund and for others to also create similar products because we believe that African innovation and technology is going to be significant going forward. We're right now working on a digital-free zone in Nigeria, and we're seeking to replicate that same digital-free zone economy across several other parts of Africa. We're focused on training Africans to learn the digital economy, engineering, and to succeed in that. And this is all building on what's already happening. So some of the largest artificial intelligence users in the world today are in Africa. Not in Boston, not in Israel, but in Africa.
And some of the most innovative technologies on the African continent. And it's a long way ahead of what we have here and indeed elsewhere in the developed world. Samaila, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you very much for your support of Invest Africa. It's wonderful to see you.
Mark, Samaila, thank you very much. Baroness Chapman, President Mahama, thank you so much. What a great way to start the day. And I think we've done exactly what we needed to with the morning opening, which is to really set the scene for the conversations that are going to be taking place throughout the day. We've already touched on many of the topics that we're going to drill further into, but the key message here, and this is the red thread that is going to run throughout the day, is that business as usual simply will not do when it comes to partnership with Africa. We're now going to move into the first panel discussion of the day, but before I do, and this isn't the last time you're going to hear this today, just a point on timing. The President, I believe, is leaving us, so we'll just, please, if you could all just stand for the President to leave the room.
Okay, next one. Sit down. Look to camera.
This is what it looks like to be exceptional, to stand out from the crowd, to make history. But what if women didn't have to be exceptional? What if they didn't have to be the first, the best, or the only woman? What if being a female engineer wasn't remarkable? What if women and men could compete as equals? I don't want to make history. I don't want to be the only woman. I want to be one of many.